Throughout Genshin Impact's long 5 years since its official release, there have been continual updates of new characters, gear, regional mechanics, and even a new element with Dendro from Sumeru that have constantly shifted Genshin's overall meta in regards to its endgame. The release of new regions typically bring about the biggest changes, and with the new characters and mechanics of its newest region, Nod-Krai, the meta is yet again starting to massively shift from the meta established in the Notland patches, changing which characters are considered best in their role. And while there have only been a handful of Nod-Krai characters released as of making this video, we definitely have enough information from their character kit design to have a good idea about the overall character kit direction and theme of Nod-Krai, so I wanted to discuss how Genshin's meta is changing and will continue to change with the introduction of Nod-Krai. To understand how Nod-Krai is changing Genshin's meta, we first need some context on how Genshin's meta looked before Nod-Krai at the end of Notland. There can be a lot to talk about on this topic, but I think the easiest way to visualize the Notland meta is to consider the best DPS and support characters during the Notland patches. Now, I generally don't like character tier lists since people's criteria for making them is different and they aren't a completely accurate meta evaluation because they lack context such as enemy matchups and endgame content, but they do provide an easy way to visualize character ranking. If I were to consider the best main DPSs by the end of Notland, the list would look something like this. This DPS list is mainly ranked based on the general range of team DPS calcs of a character's best teams using KQM artifact investment, 5 stars at C0, 4 stars at C6. In the Notland era, the top 3 DPSs are Malwika, Skirk, and Varessa. Then, in a tier below them, you can group all the other Notland DPSs and the strong Fontaine ones together. Sheet DPS wise, all these DPSs are similar, so they can all easily shift in ranking between them depending on enemy matchup. Honorable mentions include C6 Gaming and Ayaka, who can be bundled with the great tier but have some extra caveats such as plunge melt timing and freeze up time. Then there's everyone else. There's plenty of decent DPSs in this category, but they aren't top of the meta in terms of team DPS, so for the purposes of analyzing Genshin's meta in Notland, we can ignore them. Looking at the DPSs and their team archetypes, you can kind of separate them into two categories. Ones who are played with amplifying reactions such as Malwika in Melt and Molani in Vape, and the ones who are played in monotype teams enabled by strong buffers such as Skirk, Neuvillette, and Chevreuse Overload teams. Teams that play around primarily transformative reactions such as Dendro teams haven't really kept up as well in terms of damage, and overall the best DPSs have been mainly characters released during and after Fontaine. Recent characters have just been better numerically, which speaks to the continual power creep present in Genshin. Now the best DPSs can only function at their best with their supports. These are the supports which I consider the best in the game prior to Nod-Krai based on their strength in their niche and team versatility. The best supports pair well with the top meta DPSs and generally are characters that give a lot of buffs and utility or deal damage from off field while also providing team buffs. And while there are plenty of older support characters like Bennett, Yelan, and Kazuha, there are also plenty of newer release ones, with some being more niche but very strong for certain characters like Escoffier and Anefa. Again, with power creep, the recent support releases are loaded with more buffs and utilities in their kit, as well as strong artifact sets like 4-piece scroll, which allows any Notland support to give 40% elemental damage bonus to a team based on the reaction they trigger, an incredibly strong damage buff. So that's the quick summary of the meta during the Notland patches, with many of the recently released characters being the strongest characters and shaping the meta, which makes sense. With an understanding of Notland's meta out of the way, a brief detour for the sponsor of today's video, Boot.dev. With technology continually advancing in every aspect of life, learning how to code has never been more useful to earn money for gotcha pulls, advance your personal career development. But unlike other online coding courses that may feel like a drag, Boot.dev uniquely gamifies the entire experience, teaching you the core concepts of back-end web development programming languages like Python, SQL, and Go, while making it feel like you're advancing in an RPG. While you're learning, you'll constantly earn XP, level up, gain achievements, and complete quests, transforming the entire process into a fun and addicting experience. And ultimately, just getting a ton of practice writing code, solving challenges, and building projects is the best way to learn the skill, especially when you're actually motivated to do so. While I wasn't a computer science major in university, I did get the chance to take an Intro to CS course, and while I did enjoy it, there's only so much a traditional course can offer. With Boot.dev's unique design made for a gamer like me, it has proven very helpful and fun to both refresh and build upon the coding concepts I learned in college. Every single course they have is available to read and watch for completely free, with the first few chapters also being free to interact with, where you can actually do some coding yourself. And if you try it and really like it, you can use my code ANDAD to get 25% off your entire first year on the annual plan with a 30-day no questions asked refund policy. Again, that's Boot.dev using code ANDAD. So with the release of Nod-Krai, the meta will almost certainly change again to be shaped by the newest characters. But aside from the new characters being numerically competitive, there are some fundamental mechanics of the Nod-Krai kits that will transform Genshin's meta even further in a way that hasn't yet been done before in the history of Genshin. Just like how Natlan's main design push was the Night Soul mechanic, the main push of the Nod-Krai patches are lunar reactions. With the Nepha, Flynn's, Llama, and Nefer, there are 2 confirmed lunar reactions that are enabled when they are in the party. Lunar Charge, which replaces Electro Charge, and Lunar Bloom, which replaces Bloom. The main thing to know about these lunar reactions is that based on the ones we have so far, they largely act like transformative reactions. This means that the reaction damage ignores defense, scales with character level and elemental mastery, and doesn't get buffed by damage percent. But unlike normal transformative reactions, the damage of lunar reactions scale off crit. In addition, lunar reaction damage can be dealt directly by certain abilities of Nod-Krai characters, not just triggering a reaction. The reason lunar reaction damage is important is that several Nod-Krai characters deal a majority of lunar damage in their kit, allowing a character's talent damage and scaling to behave as though it were reaction damage. Nepha's A1 and Flynn's special burst both deal lunar charge damage to scale off attack and make up a big majority of their damage profile, along with triggering the lunar charge reaction itself. So along with most of their damage having their normal attack multiplier, it also scales with EM and ignores enemy defense. Lunar Bloom is a bit different as the actual reaction doesn't deal any special damage, so there is only direct Lunar Bloom damage from character abilities. Llama's hold skill does this, but it is mainly Nefer who relies on direct Lunar Bloom damage from her abilities to deal damage. The more lunar based characters there are, the more important this damage type becomes, and other Nod-Krai systems incentivize teams to use lunar reaction damage. First, the new artifact sets gives the whole team lunar reaction damage bonus. Second, with Nod-Krai's moon sign mechanic, when you have at least 2 Nod-Krai characters on the team, you can get a team-wide lunar reaction damage buff when your non-Nod-Krai characters use their elemental skills or bursts. And third, just like how Night Soul was more effective against certain enemies, lunar reaction damage will be more effective against some of the new Nod-Krai enemies. But the main important thing about lunar reaction damage are its properties due to it behaving like transformative reaction damage. First, the damage ignores defense. This is similar to how Zenless Zone Zero released Rupture agents whose damage uniquely ignores enemy defense by utilizing a special sheer force stat, making them effective against certain enemies. While the defense aspect doesn't seem that relevant at the start of Nod-Krai, HOYOverse can easily design new high defense enemies to favor characters that deal mostly lunar reaction damage. Second, while lunar reaction damage increases with crit and elemental mastery, it does not get buffed by elemental damage percent. This attribute is important when considering builds for Nod-Krai characters. For example, while Nepha and Flynn's are electro damage dealers, they do not want to use electro goblets. This is because their kits mainly deal lunar reaction damage, so electro damage goblet doesn't buff the majority of their damage. Thus, they will mainly use an attack goblet instead, since their talents, which includes their abilities that deal direct lunar charge damage, scales with attack. Elemental mastery goblet is also an option since lunar damage scales with EM, giving the stat more importance in builds. So elemental damage goblets won't have as much value in Nod-Krai, which may be a good thing since a specific elemental damage goblet has a very low drop rate, but the decreased value of damage percent has an even greater effect on the strength of existing supports for Nod-Krai characters. Many of the best supports that have existed before Nod-Krai were very strong in the meta because they provided damage percent buffs to the team. Yelan and Farina were the 2 best Hydro supports for a long time because of their off-field damage and damage percent buffs. Kazuha gives damage percent when he swirls, and every single Notland support who uses 4-piece scroll gives damage percent to the team. But with a Nod-Krai team that deals a majority lunar reaction damage percent buffs don't do much for them, and this is highlighted in Flynn's team building on his release. Flynn's best team includes a Nepha, a Hydro support, and a last support. One of his best last supports is Sucrose because of 4-piece Viridescent Venerer and the fact that she buffs Elemental Mastery for the team, which increases lunar charge damage. In previous other teams, Kazuha or Shilonin were usually the go-to choices over Sucrose, but since damage percent is not very valuable, Sucrose now comes on top. And for the Hydro support, while historically Yelan and Farina were the best Hydro supports for teams by a large margin, since damage percent isn't valuable in this team, while Farina and Yelan are still good for Flynn's, Aino is similar in performance, getting better with Constellation since she actually provides buffs like EM with C1 and lunar damage percent with C6. And even units like Candace and Sejuin, who generally aren't considered good units, aren't that far behind Farina and Yelan for Flynn's because they enable shorter rotation times and because the majority of Farina and Yelan's support value isn't used. Same idea applies to Nefer, who also doesn't synergize that well with Yelan and Farina to the point where C0 Ino is generally the best Hydro recommendation on her release. Even vertical investment like Farina's C2, which is typically very strong for increasing a team's damage, doesn't do much for lunar characters like Flynn's and Nefer because most of the value of Farina's early constellations is increasing her damage percent buff, which doesn't buff lunar damage. Thus, many of the existing supports in the game don't completely synergize very well with Nod-Krai characters that mainly deal lunar reaction damage, making room for newer support characters to fulfill this niche. For instance, Columbina is speculated to be Hydro and serves as the Archon unit of Nod-Krai, so she is very likely the premier Hydro support of the region. And with character bundles becoming more common with Escoffier plus Skirk, Inetha plus Flynn's, and Llama plus Nefer, all of which introduce more specialized supports, the overall value of more general supports continues to decrease. So depending on how hard HOYOverse decides to push the lunar reaction agenda, supports that have been synonymous with top of the meta for so long such as Shilonin, Kazuha, Farina, and Yelan may not be very meta relevant in Nod-Krai due to how lunar reaction damage works. Now of course I'm not saying that all of these characters will suddenly become irrelevant in Nod-Krai, they are still fine to use with the Nod-Krai characters and all the other existing DPS characters still exist, so these supports will still be strong, and it's likely that not every character releasing in Nod-Krai will play around a lunar reaction. Still, these previously meta-defining supports ultimately don't have amazing synergy with characters designed around lunar reactions, thus having decreased value for the new lunar characters and shifting the overall support meta of Genshin. But how much the meta will change ultimately depends on the amount of lunar-based reactions and characters HOYOverse plans to release in Nod-Krai. There is already Lunar Charge with Inetha and Flynn's and Lunar Bloom with Llama and Nefer. There could be more characters such as 4 stars that also play in either Lunar Charge or Lunar Bloom teams. But more lunar reactions may be planned in the future Nod-Krai patches. With Columbina looking to be Hydro, one prevailing rumor is that lunar reactions are only for Hydro-related reactions. Thus, things like Lunar Vape and Lunar Freeze could still be on the table. Perhaps HOYOverse doesn't stick to Hydro-related reactions and introduces reactions like Lunar Superconduct or Lunar Crystallize as a way of buffing weaker existing reactions. Maybe Lunar Charged and Lunar Bloom are the only lunar reactions that won't get buffed by regular damage percent buffs, but the other lunar reactions will. Lastly, there is a good possibility that not all the new characters that are releasing in the Nod-Krai patches will be lunar reaction based. Just like how Skirk and Escoffier were non-Nightsoul characters but were released in the Notlan patches, some of the upcoming characters may not play around lunar reactions and be designed for a different purpose. We'll just have to wait and see how things pan out during our time in Nod-Krai. But one thing's for sure, the meta will change in Nod-Krai, and for the players that do care about meta strength for endgame, you'll have to be prepared to adjust for the incoming meta change. I hope you all enjoyed my analysis on the upcoming new meta of Nod-Krai. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a ton and it lets me know that you like this type of content and I should make more of it. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. One final thank you to Boot.dev for sponsoring this video. Check them out if you want to learn some coding, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.